So that's Petteri Nykky, the head coach of the Finnish men's floorball national team. And now next up is his colleague from Switzerland, Mr. David Jansson. I see you on the screen. How are things in Switzerland?
Actually, I'm in a more exotic place than Dubai, and I'm actually not in Switzerland. I'm in North Sweden at the moment. I'm going down to Switzerland in a couple of days, so people might think that Umeå is less exotic than Dubai, but I've been to Dubai and I've been to Umeå, and Umeå is more exotic to me.
From a Finnish perspective, I agree completely. That's way more extreme, I have to say. Your topic today is the direction of elite floorball, so I leave the floor to you. So go ahead.
Thank you very much, Oskari, and thank you to Erikille. Thank you to the Finnish Floorball Federation and also to the IFF, of course, for setting up this platform. I think it's really cool, and like I said, thank you very much for the invite. So I'm going to be talking about the direction of elite floorball. I'm going to do it a little bit twofold here. I'm going to start by comparing the top four nations, being the Finns, the Swedes, the Czechs, and us in Switzerland. A little bit what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years to kind of settle where we're at. And after that, I will take us through a little bit of what I think, how I predict the future in floorball. I think that that way we will get where we are right now and where I think we're heading. So we can just jump over to my presentation here. And I'll start by talking a little bit about the similarities and the differences. Like I said, a comparison of the top four nations. So these are the things that I'm going to cover. And I think what's important here to know before I start rambling these things, I'm not going to be stating what I think is right or wrong or something like that. This is just what I've picked up, and it's kind of unfiltered. I also think it's important to know, I think Petri set me up really well with his stuff, because I think I'll make some connections to him during my ride here. The physical part, the mental part, that's going to be like a huge umbrella over everything that I'm going to say. But I knew that he would be talking about that. So I will focus a little bit more on like the filtered floorball stuff to give the nerds something in terms of the floorball stuff. But remember that the physical readiness and the mental readiness, that's kind of something you'd have to assume that players have that to be able to do these things that I'm going to talk about here. So I'm going to start by talking about the return to the man-man based floorball, and that's why I made the connection to Petri. He talked about the 5 times man-man thing, and we'll see this especially with the Finns and the Czechs, a little bit with us, and to a certain extreme, to a certain extent with the Swedes as well, but mainly the Finns and the Czechs. The superhero factor I've mentioned, I've named this, so that's going to be, you know, what all teams, their main skills, so to speak, what they build their team around. I'm going to talk a little about intuition and system. This is, of course, something that happens with every team. Like Petri mentioned it as well within his framework. There's, of course, a lot of intuition, but I still think the Swedes have stood out here. And I'm not going to talk about the new Swedish staff because I'm going to have a little bit of a broader perspective, but what the Swedes have done in the last 5-10 years. Then shortly about the approach to the must-win games in a WFC. And it's going to be Sweden versus Finland. And a little bit, I'm going to lump us and the Czechs in the same category. And then the importance of possession and the importance of having the lead, the way it's turned out at the top level right now. And finishing qualities. And also this is going to be a little bit Sweden, Finland lumped together, and us and the Czechs lumped together. So I'm going to start by talking about the return to the man-man based floorball. This has been a polarizing thing. I think there are sides. I mean, it's been an obvious key for the Finns being able to shut the Swedes down in many important games. And I think from an entertainment standpoint, you can always discuss how this has affected the game because of especially if you look at the finals, the last 2-3 finals or something like that, there's been a referees more or less swallowing the whistle. So it's been a really aggressive way of playing, which can have their obvious advantages and their disadvantages. But I think it's something to keep in mind when we talk about this. So I'm going to run the video here, and I'm going to discuss the return of the man-man based floorball, which I guess could be considered to be kind of the roots of floorball.
All right, so here are a couple of video clips that show us that floorball is tactically a little bit trending back to where it came from, so to speak. So here we see the Finns. At times you'll see them playing a little bit more zonal based with their wingers, and then the other players will play man-man. But in this example here, we actually see Hautaniemi here turning around to follow Rasmus Enström back in his own end. And after that, it's just 3 times man-man down here with these 3 players. But actually, you also see the wingers here work in man-man. So this entire clip, you'll see them just following their guys blindly. And this, of course, stops the Swedes from creating 2-on-1 situations. So in older systems, this pass here from Emil Johansson back to Johan Samuelsson would have been a 2-on-1. But of course, because of the man-man, you add another player here for the Finns, and these things reduce the number of odd man situations that the Swedes will find, and they've struggled to be able to create a lot in the important games in the last WFCs. So the Czechs obviously being run by the Finnish coach Pete Kettunen at the time, so you see a similar thing here, though they, in this example, play a little bit more zonal based with their wingers, and then you see the 3 guys behind them work in man-man, and just rotating to follow their guys and leaving their original position, so to speak, and then another layer of zonal-based players come here, and the ball gets played back to RD again. So a really obvious shift to man-man with these 2 countries. With my team, Switzerland, so we have 2 different systems. One is a little bit more man-man based than the other, but also our zonal setup of the 2-2-1. Here you see the offense triangle of the 2-2-1 is also kind of man-man based in a way. So this is a good example to show this. Ball gets played down the corner. It turns into a 1-1 situation here. Support player from the Czechs come over here, but he gets picked up as a man-man here as well. Then the ball changes side here, and we'll see certain similarities here as well. So one man-man here, and once the Czech goes over here, we'll see our defender leaving his original position to follow his man-man guy like this. So a very obvious shift among most of the top countries.
And this is, of course, really interesting because it puts an increased emphasis on the physical readiness. So if you want to play man-man, of course, you'd rather be ready for the man-man situation. Score's going to be tough if you are in a big disadvantage physically. So puts even more emphasis on the stuff that Petri mentioned before me. So that was the return to the man-man based floorball. I think it's really interesting to see that it's trended like that, and it's been so over a couple of years now. And to put an identifier on every 4 team, this is, of course, the sample size isn't huge here. I'm just going to mention one thing per team, but I think it's still interesting, the superhero factor, how the teams are, their main skills, so to speak. So I'm going to start with the Swedes here and let the video speak for itself.
So starting off with the Swedes, I'd pick their offensive defensemen. We look at Emil Johansson and Kasper Hedlund here with the quality of the passing. And then after a while, Emil Johansson deciding to put central pressure here. And he does this while being chased from the behind from Jan Zaug, and he then goes on to deliver a quality pass through the middle. And if we just go back and look at that pass again, so he's in a really tight position because he's being hunted from behind, and he has that kind of corridor to deliver this quality pass on. And of course also the risk that one of these guys will shift their sticks to the middle. He just brings this pass with so much quality, and that of course opens up our defense here, and the Swedes are creating a good scoring chance, or almost a good scoring chance at least. So they're really, really good at that. That would be their superhero factor for me. Looking at our team, I think we've made a lot of progress in playing with ball, and we have a really loyal team that likes to commit themselves to a game plan. So we've had a lot of this fluent motion with the ball where we try to attack players from 2 directions. So forcing this check forward to a tricky decision, then following up with our right shooter here. We look at it once more, how he doesn't stop, but he keeps on running. So there's a risk, of course, involved here with using this many players, but that's been a thing that I think we've done really well over the last years. Looking at the Czechs, just an amazing counterattack team. We'll see here. We try to put pressure on them after having lost the ball here, and just how well this works as a team. You see the head being high here already. Nemecek finding a good position, then we try to put pressure on them. Just the passing is pinpoint, and this execution here from from Langer over to Bennis is it's just so nice that this quality pass over here hits the blade, and then he puts it in. Just an amazing floorball play, and they're really, really skilled at that. Finns, I'm going back to the man-man defense here. Once again, you see the Swedes looking for 2-on-1s here, but there are no 2-on-1s, and in the end they force something that's pretty difficult. Of course, this goal doesn't come directly from that mistake, but in the end it's a counterattack that the Finns provoke from their great defending, and this is the 5-2 goal with 10 minutes to play in the last World Championship Finals. So that would be their superhero factor for me.
All right, so just a small recap, like I said, just giving everyone a little bit of a feeling for the identity of the top teams. This is something that I like. I feel that if all top teams players would just be silhouettes, so they'd all be black shadows running around playing, I think it would be pretty easy to identify all the top teams, which I think is a cool thing from a storytelling standpoint as well, which I think speaks for floorball in the long run, being even more interesting for the broader audience. All right, so now I'm going to go to intuition versus system. And like I mentioned before, this is going to happen within every framework, in every team. Petri talked a lot about it, but I think the Swedes have been the ones who have stood out the most. And I want to say again that this is their previous regimes and not the actual staff that is on place here. They've only had one EFT, so I think it's too short of a sample size, but we'll have a look a little bit how they've been very outspoken about using intuition within their system a lot. And we'll look here, we'll see some amazing advantages of that. And we'll also see the potential not so good effects about it.
So let's have a look at the intuition versus system for the Swedes. So here just a plain free hit from the corner for the Finns. And you will see here Savonen running through the middle. And all of a sudden, he binds 2 of the Swedes, and then the other 3 are almost on a line here. And the Finns find an open Laminen just in the slot, kind of out of nowhere. There are no There's no weird movement happening here. There's nothing special. It's just a pretty normal free hit from the corner, and of course, clever movement from the Finns. But opens up, and then 2 shots, and kind of out of nowhere. So definitely a situation where intuition did not help the Swedes. Here we have another situation where it's a free hit. It's 2-2 in the third period here in the World Championship Finals. And we see Martin Östholm of Sweden going high up on his guy here. And then Kivilehto with a smart move leaving the ball here. And the Swedes would start off kind of man-man based here. But in the end, the Kivilehto move puts them in a bad spot when it comes to the man-man marking, and Kivilehto ends up scoring this goal. So here, intuition didn't pay off either for them. Here's another example where it actually does. We'll start by looking at Albin Sjögren being the left winger here, and Rudd is putting pressure behind the net. And then here, we'll soon see him drifting back with his guy, a little bit man-man-ish, and forces Tobias Gustafsson to come up on the right side, and Jonas Svan dropping down on the left side here. And here Sweden is a little bit in a chaos because of Sjögren playing the right D. But this time intuition works out, so Alexander just steals the ball and then goes for a really impressive backhand shot and scoring the equalizer for Sweden here. Here's another situation where their intuition definitely pays off. So an errant pass from Emil Johansson to no one. So Matthias Hofbauern picks it up, and it's a 3-on-2 for Switzerland. And then it goes the other way around with some smart decision-making from the Swedes, and all of a sudden an even better scoring chance for them. Just look at these decision-making things out of nowhere. It's a chaotic situation. They're so good at this. Their intuition really pays off here. So the little stutter step from Emil Johansson, the quick little move from Galante, and the forward into the middle movement from Rasmus Enström. And even here on the equalizing goal in the semi-final against us, the spinorama here from Alexander Rudd hitting the blade of Albin Sjögren, also coming a little bit out of nowhere, so to speak. So intuition, at times it's great, and at times I guess a systematic approach will be even better.
I don't know if you heard me interrupting myself there. That's next level presentation from me. But just to recap this a little bit, I think you see here the 10,000 hours in terms of You probably, a lot of you listening to this are nerdy enough to know about the 10,000 hour theories, about practicing so much that you become elite into something. Like their decision making when these chaotic situations are up is just extremely cool to see. And I think that probably helps having a lot of hours, which the Swedes tend to have. So really, really cool thing there, and the obvious advantages and disadvantages of intuition. Then just shortly about the approach to must-win games. Like you'd see a little bit of difference between the Swedes and the Finns. And I mean, must-win games, I define them as the ones where the one team is way better than the other on paper. So if the Swedes would play the Danes or the Finns would play the Danes, for an example, during the WFCs, you've seen the Finns doing less in these games and still winning them comfortably, while the Swedes at times can just run over a team and win a period with 11-0. Which can sound a little bit unfair because 11-0 in floorball is of course not 11-0 in hockey or soccer or something like that. But this approach has been a little bit different for them, which might have paid dividends in the end, that the Finns might have more energy. It's really tough to measure, of course, but that's been a little bit of different approach. For us in the Czechs, for an example, I think we're in another position where we really need to be turned on in all games. Like we need to be on our toes playing against oppositions where we're maybe a little bit better on paper, the Latvians, the Germans, the Norwegians, etc. Where we, of course, also saw the Latvians beat the Czechs in the last WFC. So I think that's been an interesting thing to follow. And also the importance of having the lead. So you see floorball games changing a lot depending on the amount of risk that the leading team will use, and forcing the other team to leave their positions and come up higher, stretching out their team. I think that has been, for everyone involved at the top level the last 5-10 years, probably can talk a little bit about that and have a feeling about that the importance of having the lead has been a big thing as well. So finishing qualities. So when we look at our numbers, for example, I know there'll be more talk about game analysis later, so I'll not talk too much about that. But like if we look at our expected goals, for an example, from games, at times you'll see overachieving, and the Finns and the Swedes have, of course, they have better finishing qualities, I think, making them more probable to be overachievers when you compare the actual goals to the expected goals. And that's the main theme about this short little video.
So looking at the finishing qualities, we start with a shot here from Vidalostica. It's a kind of a 2-on-2 situation, I guess you could say. There's a guy in the shooting lane. There's a 1-on-1 situation in here as well. And he just rips this top corner from there. And this is something I would say that players from, for an example, the Swiss League aren't really used to. This kind of shooting from there, that wouldn't be considered a scoring chance. So, yeah, extreme finishing qualities. Here we look at an example with the Swedes. So it's a cross pass coming through from Rudd to Nilsbeth, and we can see that I'll slow it down a little bit here. He doesn't get the ball perfectly to him. He has to take a step back, and he still manages to shoot that ball. I mean, it isn't a perfect shot by any means, but just that the circumstances of that shot and still being able to get that through, even though he doesn't get the ball perfectly to him, that's of course a huge quality. But this of course also goes for odd man rushes and the way of finishing these. We have a situation here, for example, with a 2-on-1 with two Finns, and I'm going to slow this one down a little bit as well, and we can just look at the execution here. I'll zoom it in a little bit, where the pass gets played from Junkarinen to Sami Johansson, and it actually goes, he lets it go between his legs. So look at this little thing here from Sami Johansson, where he on purpose lets it go through his legs to be able to shoot it on his forehand, and then he finds a small spot between the hands of Pascal Meyer in the net. So just a couple of examples of astonishing finishing quality.
All right, good. So let's leave what's happened and where we are right now, and take a quick look into the crystal ball a little bit, where I think we're going. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the handball effect. And what do I mean with that? Well, I mean that I hope and I think that in the future, if teams will be defending low, meaning giving the other team the middle line, so to speak, then they also will automatically give a shooting opportunity to the other team. And at handball, you know how that's played. Like when one team has the ball, the other team's forced to go low, and when they go low, then you have this atmosphere that a goal could be coming any second, right? Because they're so good at shooting, and it creates this cool atmosphere. I think you know that there's a risk of the shot, but then you know also that the counterattack, if the counterattack is going to come, that's also going to be a big deal. So I really hope that we will get to that kind of atmosphere in floorball. I'm also going to talk a little about the third dimension, meaning playing airborne passes. And this is maybe the most important thing for me. I hate the word defender because I think they are and will be the most important offensive players, and forwards, of course, being the most important defensive players. So I'm turning these words around a little bit, and that's been very important to me for a couple of years now, and I think it's going to be even more important in the future. And then also a little bit about stealing from other sports. But let's jump right into the handball effect and listen to myself.
Yeah, and to illustrate this, that I've chosen to call the handball effect, this would be a good thing, I think. We're here set up in our 2-to-1 defense, and the Finns are working the ball, and then eventually the ball's going to come over to Lastica on the right side. And here we have at least 4 of our guys on, so to speak, the right side of the ball, and we're also closing him down close to the center line with our steering guy, and he still manages to go in here and fire a lethal shot like that. And I kind of hope that in the future shooting skills will go up so much that it isn't possible to play a defensive style of game, that the range of the shots for almost every elite player would be something like this. I mean, almost the entire zone. Maybe, of course, not behind the net, but something like this. And that's, of course, would be a cool thing, I think, for the game, if passive defense systems would be punished. Then how to beat the zonal man-man mixtures, like the 1-2 systems when they play the forwards with a zonal-based system. Well, there's a cool thing here. I'll fast forward this a little bit before we come to this here. So here at this moment here, the 2 Finns up here are playing a little bit more of a zonal game, and the 3 guys behind are seeking man-mans, and you see these man-man situations like this. But what will happen here is that Martin Östholm will play the ball and then run into this zone here, and it will open up for him because the 2 zonal Finns are not following him, so he can step into this zone here and get the ball back. He fans on the ball here, doesn't hit it perfectly, but we'll look at it again. So these are, of course, things that I think that teams will incorporate better going forward, and into beating the more man-man structured system that are more or less 5 times man-man. Well, it will be turning these one-on-ones into an advantage, practicing one-on-one offensive skills more. And 2 versions of that here we see Michi Schies working 1-against-1 against Nemecek. And in the end, he does his guy, and another guy has to go and compensate, and then he finds the guy he leaves in the middle for an empty net. Of course, this is not how it's going to look every time. This is a fantastic little thing from Michi Schies, but the thing that you can turn the one-on-ones into your advantage, I think the rules in floorball still should make it possible for the one-on-one players offensively to have an advantage. Or this one here, even though the Czechs are playing it a little bit more 2-to-1 in this game, it's still a one-on-one situation here where Paolo Redi just uses the ball and his leverage and the physics to his advantage here. Just turns around, and of course, if you beat your guy in a man-man system, you'll have good odds of looking good and getting good results.
Good. Another factor, the third dimension, this video speaks for itself, so I'm going to run it directly.
So let's look at 2 examples of the third dimension. Here a ball gets played over to Jan Sauk, and this is, of course, a little bit of a tricky situation for the Latvian right D here. He has one guy in the middle, though he's a lefty, and you might consider his handedness a disadvantage for him here, but I'd argue it's almost the other way around. And then he has a righty over here that he has to give some respect to as well. And he doesn't really decide here. He stays in the middle, then the flip pass comes from Jan Sauk, and Mauro shoots it. It's even better to see it here. You could see that the handedness, that he actually has his backhand side here, almost speaks to his advantage here in the end. Gets the little flip pass and scores. And then we have this example from the EFT where the Swedes do exactly the same thing. And you see this a lot, and I think this will definitely be a thing in the future. since it's so tough, of course, to take away passes going in airborne.
Yeah, just a big difference there. Taking away the floor, being aggressive, making the court smaller, so to speak, with physical advantages in the man-man play. That's one thing, but taking away these airborne passes, that's going to be a tricky thing. And now to one of my main topics, like I mentioned before, like the defenders being the most important offensive players and the attackers being the most important defensive players. I think this is an approach that we should, I try to stay away from the word defender, like I said. I consider them more playmakers. And I hope that we can find a way out of this thinking.
So here's some clips to prove my point that I think that the defenders are the most important offensive players. We'll see Kasper Hedlund here get a ball in the last WFC. He's getting put under pressure, and he's got the ball on his right side, so he's kind of facing the middle. So he's a little bit under time pressure here, and he's going to find a way through Christoph Meyer, and it's so obvious that he actually is aiming for this little spot here. And if defenders can do like that, if they can play through guys, so to speak, that's a really tricky thing to defend. We'll look at it again. So I would say they're definitely the most important offensive players, and the name defenders I think is so old, and I think we should try to find a way around that, because it's just not true that they are mainly defenders. We'll see another example here. We'll see Robin Ilsberg move over to his off wing, so to speak, in floorball. And he'll get a shot from here. And of course, if you can have that threat from the backcourt, that's another argument that the defenders are definitely very, very important offensive players. And then we can go the other way around, of course, and talk about how important the attackers are on defense. So here we see Manu Maurer, who I think is a great example of this. He smells blood here. He's able to win this ball, and then almost kind of on his own creates a big scoring chance. Or the one here, also from the same WFC game. We'll see him taking his spot here and then hunting down Kasper Hedlund, stealing the ball, and just creating on his own. So I think that's another thing that speaks for the attackers being actually the most important defensive players, and definitely being the first wave of defense, which of course can help out so much on.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, that's going to be a tendency that we're going to see a lot, and I hope that others will follow that kind of thinking. And then the last thing in terms of looking into the future is stealing from other sports. And here I'm going to show you a little bit how I used ice hockey for one of the zone entries that we use a lot.
Let's have a look at a good example of how it works, stealing from other sports. So this is a thing I did maybe 10 years ago now. Looking at the hockey players always facing the boards with their handedness when they're getting angles to beat like a 2-to-1 system, because almost all hockey teams play a version of a 2-to-1. We'll see it here from the Washington Capitals as well. When they come down, they actually fetch the puck with the stick facing the board so that they'll get beneficial angles. And I thought about this in floorball too. I remember this game Martin Östholm, when I was coaching Pixbo, was limited here because they were hunting him down with one player and then letting his D partner have a lot of the ball. So we decided to seek him in a later circumstance, so getting the ball to him later on, in this case going around the net, and then have him with his handedness facing the board so he can get the direct shot from the pass from behind. So these are things that we stole from ice hockey that have actually worked really well. There are, of course, things to get from American football or basketball, or probably from many other sports that we haven't thought about. So I think that could be a huge thing moving forward, being open-minded, and maybe stealing is the wrong word, but at least gaining inspiration and then trying to modify this stuff so that it suits for floorball.
Yeah, so interesting. Like I said, I think also other sports like American football, basketball, there are a lot of opportunities for us to steal in a clever way. Yep, that's kind of it. The conclusion for me, what I want to see from players and from coaches, what I think will be the most important thing looking forward at the direction of elite floorball players. I think the functional technique is going to be a big thing. Like I've talked a lot about decision making and shooting here. So functional technique, of course, is the ground level, the basic stuff you need to know: how to play one-handed, two-handed, how to not look at the ball as much. So very important ground level to actually be doing the stuff we want to do in the future. Decision making, always going to be, of course, interesting. That's a big theme, of course. I mean, covers so much ground, but still very important. And the physical factors, especially speed, endurance, to me, it's going to be huge to be able to play the stuff I'd want to see from floorball in the future. And from coaches, Petri mentioned earlier building his team from defense and moving forward, which I think is something that almost everyone does. But I think we've reached the point now where everyone can defend with different systems. It's really tough to pick a system that's better than another in the floorball world. So I think we've come there where I think it makes more sense to use structure on defense, use the players, of course, to give their inputs as well, and then focus more on offense, how to play with the ball, because so many goals are counterattack goals that I would say that if you improve your offense, you will also improve your defense indirectly by not letting up too many counterattack chances. Teaching decision-making, having your own way of teaching it, thinking about it actively, not just saying that offense is something that has to do with creativity, etc., but actually giving a framework there as well. Of course, letting players have their own say, but having a framework for that as well. And then thinking one step ahead out of the box. I mentioned this hockey stealing thing that I had. I think there are so many other things out there. We've heard it before from other presenters today. It's a young sport still, and we need to use the advantages of having a young sport. I think that is one of the coolest things being involved in floorball.
Apologies for the power outages. 1 second power outages here at Erkkilä, but now apparently we're back online, and we still hopefully have David Jansson online. I have a couple of questions for you from our audience. Lucas from the Czech Republic has asked, do you think the tactics and game style of top 4 countries are somehow dividing into 2 groups, the quote-unquote Finnish, including Finland and the Czech Republic, and the quote-unquote Swedish, including Sweden and Switzerland? It might have something in common with you and Mr. Kettunen as coaches of the Swiss and the Czech national teams. And if so, do you think it might have some consequences for the future, meaning there are going to be 2 dominant styles facing each other?
I think it's a good question. I feel that we're a mixture a little bit. I think we have some, if you want to call it, Finnish elements to our game as well. I mean, we've had that, our Brajad line, for an example, since 2015, playing a pretty man-man based and sometimes very high pressing line, using a kind of a 1-2 system. And I also think that the sport, I mean, it could be a thing if you'd have the same coaches in place for a longer time. Now, I've been there since 2015. Pete's been for a while. Nick has been for a while as well, but Swedes have been changing. So if the personal stands there, then maybe for a couple of years. But I think it's also a bit of a copy-paste sport so far. When someone has a lot of success with one system, people tend to copy-paste a little bit. So I think that the rotation of the coaches and the copy-paste element will still not make you see that big of a divide. And I don't see us as being totally Swedish either, so to speak. But a very good question.
Another one from John, and apparently he also has a comment that it's called borrowing or developing an idea, not stealing. But, a question about transition when losing the ball, as there are many goals scored from transitions. How would you see that this has developed in the top 4?
That's a really good question, and I guess it's semantics with stealing or borrowing. Borrowing sounds way more nice, but I don't know if we're supposed to be nice all the time in floorball.
It's branding.
Yeah, exactly. It's branding. Yeah, Peter knows more about that. The transition part is really interesting. I still think that the 5 seconds after losing the ball is something that you don't prioritize high enough. So that could be a thing that could change the balance a little bit in terms of the top nations. But like I said, like defending and counterattacking, when you get odd man rushes and stuff like this, more or less, I think every team is good on that. The sport is structured that way right now with how we're teaching and how we're working, that there is an advantage to winning the ball on defense and then counterattacking because of these odd man rushes. But I think the biggest improvement is in the 5 seconds after you've lost the ball. How can you use maybe a little bit Jürgen Klopp soccer thinking of actually using that as an advantage to win the ball back, for an example? That could be a thing that we could see coming up. But I think this is also a situation where other nations could provide something new to the scene. I don't think everything needs to come from the top 4 nations.
All right, thank you for that answer, and also I'd like to thank you for your fantastic presentation. Very interesting to hear your thoughts and also see the video material.